The retail inflation figures are out, and retail inflation has fallen to 6.77% in the month of October. The retail inflation has fallen to the lowest level in 3 months now. Rural inflation has been above urban inflation for the last 5 months, and in October as well, rural inflation has been above urban inflation. Now, there's soaring inflation across commodities, and we can also tell you that inflation now is at 6.77%, which is lower than the 7.4% figure that was recorded in the month of September. So it is lower than September. It's the lowest that we've seen in 3 months, but it's still an inflation figure of over 6%, which means it's still above the Reserve Bank's target and the Reserve Bank's threshold of 6%. So still above Reserve Bank's threshold, but it is the lowest figure that we've seen in the last 3 months. If we talk about the inflation figures for the last few months, September it was 7.04%. In the month of August it was 7%. July it was 6.75%. And now it's at 6.77%. So it's the lowest inflation figure that we've seen since the month of July. If we talk about categories, food and beverage inflation at 7.04%. Clothing and footwear at 10%. Housing at 4.58%. And fuel and light at 9.93%. These are the primary categories. So the inflation highest in the clothing and footwear category. Fuel and light inflation has gone down now, because remember, crude oil prices are also going down. Crude oil prices are going down globally. Brent crude prices are down by 16% in the last 6 months. Let's look at now how this directly impacts you. Retail inflation is the overall figure across categories, but let's look at commodity-wise how the prices of various commodities have changed over the last 1 year. This is data from the Department of Consumer Affairs. Rice has gotten 6% more expensive. Atta, wheat has gotten expensive as well. You can see salt pack has gotten 19% more expensive, from 19 to 22 now. Atta has gotten 17% more expensive in a year. Milk has gotten 8% more expensive. And categories of oil, dal, groundnut oil more expensive by 8%. Tur or arad dal is expensive by 7%, and rice price is up by 6%. So this is the retail inflation across categories. The overall figure is at 6.77%, but as we saw that the various categories have inflation more than that as well for the commodities that we use for our daily life. Now we are joined by guests now on the broadcast to break down these numbers and to help us understand the impact of these numbers even better. Vijay Sardana, who's an economist, is joining us now, and Sanchita Mukherjee, who's a senior financial services professional and managing partner at Talk the Walk LLP. If I can start with you, Mr. Vijay Sardana, first. When the US inflation fell, it has been falling for the last few months, many were seeing it as a sign that inflation might have peaked. In India, we've seen that after 2 months of inflation rising, it has fallen for the first time, and it's the lowest in 3 months. Would you say that it's a possibility that inflation might have peaked in India as well?
First of all, good evening to all of you. Yes, this is a comfort news. Let me be very clear on this. Remember that last month when there was inflation was going up, we had a massive rainfalls in many production areas, especially in the area of vegetable growing area and other perishables. This led to a lot of crop damages, which led to a spike in inflation. Now we have seen the new harvesting is coming, the new crop is coming, that's cooling down the prices in the retail market. So there is a direct correlation which we were saying. On the other side, there was another area of inflation, which was imported inflation, which is related to crude. Indian rupee was devaluing. On the other side, the crude prices were going up. Now that factor is also under comfort. So what we are trying to say is that both aspects of inflation, one is the local weather crisis and then the international, fuel crisis.
Right.
Both are easing out, and that is reflecting the easing of inflation, which we can see witness in the data which is released today.
So primarily you're saying it's the local weather conditions paired with the Brent crude prices that have gone down over the last 6 months. If I can come to you, Sanchita Mukherjee, the Reserve Bank has been hiking interest rates to control this very inflation. Though it's still above the Reserve Bank's 6% threshold, would the expectation now be that the pace of those rate hikes will now finally come down?
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, you're quite right. In fact, if you were to see the September policy minutes of the meeting, the RBI governor was very clear that the inflation reading for October would actually come down, and that is precisely how it has played out. So we would expect a very moderate kind of a rate hike in the December policy. If at all, the rate hike has to be there because of the Federal Reserve heightening the rates across all advanced economies and the Federal Reserve. In fact, if you were to see in the September policy, it was the first time the RBI governor actually spoke about the Federal Reserve and how it is very significant. So to avoid any major disruption to currency movements, we would have to look at a moderate kind of a rate hike, which possibly the MPC will. However, having said that, 2 members out of the 6-member MPC team are already in favor of not having any hikes, so which is again a great comfort for India. Possibly by next year we can see the terminal rates to have been achieved, and once the Federal Reserve starts pausing on their rate hikes, we can actually see rate cuts in India happening.
Right. So what would be your expectation? You're saying that rate hikes could be moderate. I mean, would you be in a position to put a number to it? For the last few months, we've seen rate hikes to the extent of 50 basis points, 40 basis points as well. How low do you think could it go by December?
Sure. I think the jury is still out there, so only time will tell. But in December, most economist polls are forecasting from 25 bips to 35 to 50, if at all. But it would, the general consensus of the feet on street is that it will be a low to moderate rate hike.
Right. Let's hope that happens. I mean, if inflation going down can in fact be taken as a positive sign for the economy at large, that'll be seen in the Reserve Bank's rate hikes that come up next in December. Vijay Sardana, to extend on the previous question that we've been discussing, that would you say that the worst could be over for at least the inflation this year? The Reserve Bank has also said that inflation could go down to 5% by Q1 next year. So at least for this year, could the worst for inflation be over, and are we starting on a downward trend from now on? What's your reading on that?
Yes, my reading is positive that I think inflation has peaked out in India, but there are a couple of other positive factors which will help us in controlling the inflation. One is the weather factor. In winters, you will find that spoilage and wastage of vegetables are less. So you will find that even more vegetable is available, less wastage, less price inflation. That is one aspect, because vegetable immediately fluctuates the price. Second, the harvesting was normal. The weather condition has become better. Sowing was normal in most of the places. So I think there is no such issue of cartelization or hoarding or any such psychological factor which can push the prices up. On the other side, I'm expecting that once the G20 leadership comes to India, I'm expecting some solution to Ukraine crisis between India may mediate, because it's a very important forum, G20, where India can play a very active role, and India is very good friend with Russia. Maybe that can reduce the lot of global uncertainty. So that is international factor which is going to do that. Right. Third important aspect, my request is that to the RBI, we should pause on the interest rate, because see, MSME suffers the most. Large corporates, they have enough cash reserves. They can dip into their own reserves and continue to sustain. Right. Any increase in interest cost hits the MSME, and which is actually a major employment source of India. So we have to think inflation management in India differently than what the West is doing. So that's my request to the RBI.
All right. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us on that discussion. And as our experts are pointing out, this can be seen as a positive trend of inflation now going down. It's at a 3-month low of 6.77%.